Hello, my name is Heather Hughes. I am Trust Lead Professional for Humanities across the Mercy and Mat, so I work with history and geography teams. This session is going to be focusing on metacognition and geography. Hopefully give you a few ideas and get you thinking about how you might want to be, if you aren't already, pulling it into your curriculum and into your teaching. I'm just going to share with you a PowerPoint that I'm going to sort of not read to you, that I will talk through with you. Go. Right. So, a couple of quotes. One taken from the GA back in 2019. And this was for new staff. It was just sort of setting out. I just wanted to set out, what we mean. It is a word that we use an awful lot, and I'm sure that some of you are using it in classrooms or thinking about it or thinking how you can get the best out of it. But the GA described it, or it's often described as thinking about thinking, and that it involves a learner approaching a new problem intelligently, monitoring their knowledge, their cognitive processes, or how they're thinking about it, and using this to make judgments about how they can then move on with future learning, with further learning. And that metacognition helps students to become autonomous in their as learners, and that in the long term, it has an effective way of improving their outcomes. The EEF back in 2018 talked about it as about ways that learners monitor and purposely direct their learning, that by metacognitive strategies, we mean strategies we use to monitor and control our cognition, such as checking that memorization technique was accurate, which I know for, particularly for our Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5 is vital, or selecting the most appropriate cognitive strategies for a task that we're undertaking. So really, I guess it's about making students savvy about what works. How am I going to approach this? I've approached it before, this sort of task, and I did it this way and it didn't really work. So it's having that really sort of strong thought process about how do I approach an activity, a task, a problem. Motivation is about our willingness to engage our metacognitive and cognitive skills and apply them to learning. So with all that, why important with geography? Because they can start to direct their own learning. Geography, particularly Key Stage 4 and 5, you have a lot of content to drive through with your students. So if they can start to become more understanding of their own performance, more understanding of what makes a success, what makes a failure, that has got to help with you getting through that content. At Key Stage 3, it's important because they could almost be not the finished product, but close to at GCSE and A level. Okay, so I think what we've got to try and do is sort of provide them with those opportunities. Memory, attention, it says there about activation of prior knowledge, all these things that make a good learner, all these things that allow us, when we're teaching, when you're teaching geography, to be moving through it more smoothly and perhaps feel more reassured that the students are getting it at that time, they're understanding it. For example, we've got some examples there. A student that does have some of these skills can think about a problem they've solved before, they can take those and they can use them again. They can apply strategies and assess it, well, this is working, this isn't working. They can try different strategies and then they can reflect and they can use that to inform on their future work. One of the things that particularly the EEF have sort of discussed and considered is that this idea of teaching metacognitive activities, this idea about students becoming more, as I said, savvy and understanding what works, why it works, should be woven into the curriculum. It's not a standalone. It's not a generic skill. It's not learning to learn. Because our students don't tend to not take skills that they've learned in one place to another lesson. I don't know about your students, but we will often talk about how our students will have a set of skills, say in English, but don't necessarily walk them down to their history room. They might have quite critical, they're learning critical skills about reading in history, say, for example, sources, but they don't then walk it down into their English lit lessons. So we need to weave it in. It needs to be woven in. In this case, you need to weave it into your geography. You know, think about where can we use this, not for the sake of it, but where can we weave it in? So it is just, it's, of course, it's something that we do in geography. Students don't find it easy to transfer these generic skills. And actually, it's almost like if you're teaching it and it's wrapped into your geography curriculum, they might not even be aware that it is metacognitive, but they will be aware that I can do these things. Introducing it. So think about where activities will allow it. So, for example, make sure that your learning objectives are very clear so that if you are introducing it, they understand. Think very carefully about is the level of challenge appropriate? Is it set to your students? Because like everything else, you've got to think about how you're going to be introducing this to your set 2s in year 9, your set 1s in year 7, your year 10s, your year 11s. Think about the fact that they will perhaps be already aware of some strategies that they might need to carry into this particular activity that you're linking with your curriculum to metacognition. Yes, I just said they don't walk skills in, but it is in there somewhere. And it you know, push them for that, make them that they are actually aware of things. Give them opportunities to carry out an activity right through to the conclusion. So think about your timing for when you want to get them thinking on this level. And also think about the context. Does the context allow you to promote and develop metacognitive talk? I'll discuss that in a little while. Now, is it going to be groups? Is it going to be individuals? Is there learner self-reflection? Now, these are not floaty. These are not, sort of things that aren't of practical value. You are within geography, within your subject, you are giving students the opportunity to become more shrewd in their thinking about when they approach particular tasks, oh, right, I know if I do this, this works. That's what you're getting by putting these opportunities in. Before you start a particular activity within one of your lessons, you need to think about, well, what do they need to have before? So have your clear understandings. Themselves as learners, are they aware how they've performed in earlier tasks you've done in geography? And that might be through verbal feedback that you gave them. It might be through written feedback. It might be through a result of an assessment. When they've done something that you're now returning to, are they aware, I do this really well when Miss asks me to. I don't do that very well, though. And then attaching that to the learning goals. Making sure that they have picked the appropriate strategies for whatever you might be asking them to do. So if it's an inquiry process, have they chosen those right strategies? Are they approaching it in a way that's going to be useful to them, or are they going off at a tangent and then they're going to get confused? Strategies you might want to thinking aloud to model. We talk about in teaching now modelling an awful lot. And I do, you do, we do, all those sorts of things. I do, we do, you do, all of these things. But it's this idea of thinking aloud. Right, I'm going to do this, and this is because I know this will work. Because if you can link to previous learning, that's brilliant. Building in time to monitor and evaluate. It might be you bring in a partner. They might have a learning partner. It might be the person next to them. It might be that peer evaluation is going on. Getting students to express themselves, to discuss in terms of strengths, development areas, next steps. When you're giving your feedback, be quite consistent in how you're going to frame it, how you're going to phrase it, and get them to be using that language when they're talking about where they're at with you. And finally, paying explicit attention to how they're working, not only what they're actually doing at that point, but right, how have you got to that point? Not, oh, you got that wrong. That's not right. It's like, well, how did you get there? How are you working? And yeah, it's a very different thought process for them as well. A lot of our students, we want to get the job done and we want to make sure it's right for you. You know, we want our ticks on our page. We want our positive verbal feedback. We want all those things. But how do you actually get there? Okay, it's not just about knowing facts sometimes. It's about how do we apply them? How am I going to be making sure that I'm on the right path? How can I use my previous learning, not just of content, but of how I did a similar activity? Right, lesson structuring. Thinking about the structure of your lessons, the environment, and really when you're planning lessons, you want to be thinking about 4 stages. You, plan, do, review. And let's just sort of set this out. So that involves getting their students a lesson starter where they consider perhaps prior knowledge. So yes, it's retrieval in a way. Any strategies they previously used to learn this topic. So it might be, you know, the classic thing with starter is just being fact driven, isn't it, about retrieval? But it could be a retrieval of, right, we're going to be doing this. How did we do a similar process when we looked at? So you're actually getting them to not just warm their brains up, but they're thinking, oh, right, yeah, I had to do it this way. I didn't work that time, so I've got to do it this way instead. Planning. Setting pupils a task or a learning goal. They need to be very clear. They need to be very explicit. Students have to very carefully plan their approach to it. The strategies they're going to use, how long they think it will take them. And so they can allocate that right amount of effort. Oh, that's actually not going to take me very long, so I don't need to. But also to start thinking about what could potentially go wrong. Now, I know as I'm saying this, if I was planning a curriculum or a set of lessons, I'd be thinking, or trying to get through a lesson, I'd think, God, that's going to take forever. And, you know, and to what end? Well, okay, let's take that out. They do a regular activity. That planning doesn't take place. And lo and behold, what happens? They've either made the same mistakes as last time because they just repeated the same process in their heads, or they come up with new mistakes. And then you spend more time giving that feedback, thinking, right, I'm going to have to amend my next lesson. I've got to take into account the fact they just didn't get it, or I'm going to have to take longer to do it. So why not spend the time doing the prep? Why not think about, right, how am I going to think this through? This is a student. How am I going to think this through as a student so that I can avoid some of these mistakes? So actually, it might not take you as long as you might be thinking if you're a little bit unsure. Well, you know, they do it. They carry out the task, but as they're doing it, they're monitoring their progress. So it might be you're walking around your room and you stop halfway through and you say, right, I can see that they're not right. Here's some sentence scaffolders. And it might be, you know, getting them to actually verbalise it. Obviously, it's been something I know that's been hit badly by COVID in many schools, and in schools, all different types of schools. So getting them to verbalise it to you, I might have to change my strategy because there's that level of maturity of thinking, but also it's them verbalising it as well. If they're getting confused by something, really highlight that, really think about that with them, because, you know, confusion is an integral part, as it says there, of learning, and boy, it is. And recognising that we don't understand something is actually really good. You know, it makes for better cognition. I don't get it. Right, well, let's stop for a minute. As opposed to, I can't do it. I don't get this. I'm getting confused here. Right, how can I approach this perhaps in a different way? What's missing? That level of thinking is surely what we want our students to be exhibited, to be going through. And review. Usually at the end of a lesson, allow your students a bit of time, you know, to review what they've learned. How successful was that strategy? What went well? What didn't go well? What am I going to do differently next time? And it might be that this is a long process towards quite a big thing. If it's A level, is this moving towards their NEA? We want students at NEA to be thinking like this. We want them to be honest and say, I'm a bit confused about this. We want them to be thinking, this isn't working. I need to stop right now. I need to rethink this one, as opposed to I'm going to play through this. I'm just going to hand it in. It's done. So these are valuable. Key stage 3 for almost, consolidating it in their heads, making them think this way. But at GCSE, it might be an exam question, a type of exam question, like, how have we answered this before? What was our thinking? And as I say, particularly for if you do teach Key Stage 5 geography, with the NEA in particular, I can't see how this would not help you. Talk, I mentioned about it, and I know I talk an awful lot, but metacognitive talk involves talking through what you're thinking while you're carrying it out. Now, I know there's a big debate about this, particularly sometimes with modelling out loud. While it's being very much a thing that is being practiced a lot and being talked a lot about, and has been for a significant amount of time, really, you have to do this very carefully, because there's discussion of the talking distract the students and so on. So think very carefully, and this is where it's worth thinking about your modelling in advance of the lesson. Think very carefully about the language that you're going to use. Think very carefully about what are they going to hear when I say these things. Talk it out loud, and so that it's very clear what they should be doing when they do their version. Questions your students should be asking through this is like, well, what do I know about this topic? Have I done something like this before? What strategies worked? How am I doing? Genuinely, how am I doing? Not like, oh, I'm rubbish at this, or oh yeah, that's done, that's amazing. And you look at it, you think, oh, that's so not amazing. Who can ask for help for this? Is it immediately the teacher, or actually is it one of my colleagues next to me? Is it person next to me? What am I going to do differently next time? I mean, what a brilliant thought that we want our students to have. What can I do differently next time? It was good. My answer's all right. My understanding's okay. I get it. But could I have got to that point more quickly? Am I fully, thoroughly happy with it? What could I do differently next time? Okay, so some work that David Perkins did back in 1992 talked about 4 stages. And it was about really helping teachers to identify how much support students require, which is not always easy. They don't immediately become these metacognitive reflective learners. It does take time, of course it does. So what Perkins came up with is that there are tacit learners. The tacit learners, they're completely unaware of what knowledge they do have. They accept if they know something in geography or not, but they're not able to explain how they went about learning it. I just know it. So that's the tacit learner. And then we might move them through to aware learners. Now, aware learners recognise some thinking processes. They can talk. Oh, I brainstormed this. I did a spider diagram. I did a spider, web. But they don't take it the next step. They don't consider or plan. Right, I've been given this task by Sir. What's the best strategy for a successful outcome? They're not there. They're aware of things, but they wouldn't be able to identify. Now we're moving on. We've got our strategic learners. Now, if you've got these people in front of you, they can organise their thinking. They can group or classify geographical data meaningfully. They can seek evidence to solve problems. They can make decisions. They can apply strategies. You want these people in your classroom. You want students moving towards being strategic in their learning. And they can explain why one method is better than another. You know, that level of development there, that level of maturity in their thinking is just, you know, it's gorgeous, isn't it? And then the goal. So the reflective learner. So what's a reflective learner? Well, they're not only strategic, they do all that other stuff, but they can also reflect on their learning while it's happening. So you can see why that's going to take quite a while to get to. A reflective learner will consider success or failure strategies they're using and then revise them as needed. So if they're doing an inquiry, they will review how successfully they're answering the question and whether they need to try something else. And then afterwards, they could explain to you, right, this went really well because, this didn't go so well because. And I think next time I need to improve that strategy. I need to do X because that will have actually made the final result so much better. So we've got there those sort of 4 different layers of learning, and you can see how that would impact on what materials you might give to your students, how you might phrase things to your students, how you might have to provide different things if you've got students starting to move into different areas but sat within the same class. But also as well, you can see how if you've got strategic and reflective learners sat in front of you, you've got a lot stronger chance of those students hitting their targets for geography. But also you've got sat there the opportunity to have lovely lessons because, you know, working with people like this, getting them to that level. But also, one other thing is, look what you've helped develop a young person into. So for that next step, whatever it might be, think about how their brains, by supporting them into this sort of way of thinking, how their brains are going to help them in their life, not just in geography, not just at school, but having that quality, that skill there, understanding things, understanding about how I think, how I could make things better. Oh, what a brilliant thing to have achieved. What I've tried to do is put together, like, come up with some ideas, and I found this. It's not mine, but I found this, and I thought, right, okay, let's use this as an example. So a class were given a task to prepare a short presentation on rainforest ecosystems. We've got our student here. This is Amy, and Amy reflects on the last topic she did, and what she thinks allowed her to learn best, and it was using textbooks. So she decides before starting this rainforest ecosystem work, she's going to read relevant chapters before she even starts drafting. Now that's metacognitive, because she's thinking about, well, I've done a kind of similar-ish thing in the past, and that bit worked for me, so I'm going to carry that bit forward. But here's the problem: the chapter that she reads, it doesn't really help her. She starts panicking because she was relying on this textbook to help her. Oh, I don't know what to do. Oh, I'm getting stressed. But again, she thinks, hold on a minute. Teacher mentioned that website might be useful. So what does she do? She's right, okay, I'm going to slide the textbook to one side. That's not working. It's making me feel, you know, really worried. I'm going to look on that website because teacher told me about this website some time ago. And bless her, Amy, she's got, you know, she's one of our better students. She's obviously listened. So she's gonna go onto that website. And guess what? The teacher knew what they were talking about. It's much more useful. Gives a really nice overview. She uses that information to start summarising a few interesting facts. And then she pauses after that. She thinks, right, she reflects. And she thinks, right, next time I'm in this situation, I'm not going to go straight to one particular source, because look what happened. I panicked. I got upset. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at a range of different sources before I start the topic. Now, again, we don't have necessarily lots of students. You might do, you know, you might be lucky, who think like that. But if we in geography could start moving them to that place, she would have not got upset. She would not have wasted time trying to, you know, drag herself through this chapter. She would have immediately started on a positive. What is she doing? She's self-regulating her learning. She's finding ways to motivate herself when she got stuck. She doesn't give up. You know, the classic, I don't get it. I don't understand. The folding of the arms, that's it. I'm done. But she doesn't. She's like, hold on a minute, this isn't working. Right, let's try something different. She's motivating herself. And over time, as she gets better at it and she gets more experiences, and this is what I do, she becomes more confident. She will take on more challenges. She will take on more tasks. And for some of them, she'll move through them a lot more quickly and comfortably because she is a metacognitive learner. And finally, at first, you will need to prompt students with these sorts of questions. Is this working for you? What else have you used? What else have I mentioned to you? Why might that be better? And so, yes, you might find, God, this is, I'm pushing. This is supposed to be them thinking. But like the tacit learner, it takes a while to go around to that point where we're into strategic and reflective. They will become more independent. Especially if you've built that into your curriculum. And they will start to use it more widely. And they'll get to the point where they're not even aware they're doing it. And it will, when we're worrying about time and get through things, if that's in place and it's of a reasonable level, that skill set, the learning will move more quickly. The level of depth to their understanding and knowledge will be deeper. And you'd hope they feel more confident saying, hold on a minute, this isn't working, I don't get this. That, again, we don't always get that off our students. They'll button up, they won't tell us. And then, we set an assessment, we get the results back, what the hell's going on? They didn't get it, but they didn't tell us. So I'm hoping that that has given you some food for thought. I hope that you've had a chance to have a bit of a think. I hope I've allayed some of the fears about this idea that metacognitive is a bit of a soft skill, maybe. Some perhaps staff that might not necessarily have thought about it as in effect, something that could save time, something that could have students in a much more confident position. And we know when they're confident, they can move through work while understanding it at a quicker rate. And that, as I say, I just hope that you can pull at least one thing out of this at this session. And so I thank you very much. I thank you for listening to Historian. And I hope that you found this very useful.